Do you have something to say?
Keanu Reeves, a successful and popular actor and musician. And I've liked him and I've liked some of his movies. The River's Edge would be my favorite of his. And Point Blank, Speed. In this video, we're going to take a look at 16 book recommendations from Keanu Reeves as compiled by the website Goodbooks. I'll leave a link to the site in the show notes. I think we can cut the celebrities a bit of slack with their book recommendations because whatever they say, whatever they recommend is going to be scrutinized. Their haters are going to use that against them. So it's a tough thing to navigate. So I'm happy to give them some slack, but it's also an opportunity for us to talk about books that otherwise wouldn't be on my radar. So let's skip the intro sequence, and but we will not skip the ad. This video is brought to you by Edifice Complex, redefining what is meant by homesick. Karim, an Algerian immigrant in Paris, has his tenuous hold on reality further jeopardized when he develops an obsessive erotic relationship with a residential building set for demolition. This is my latest book. I think it's quite good, but it definitely needs more readers and more reviews. It's available through Amazon as an ebook or paperback. I'll leave links in the subscription box below. It's a great way to support the channel. It's also a good read if you like your fiction dark and weird. Kicking things off is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I think this is a great choice. This book has a lot of fans, and they are a passionate fan base. My only interaction with this book was when I was young, like a little, like 7, 8 years old. I had the Hobbit, I believe, the Hobbit play along record. So you have this little book with words and pictures, and then you have the record, and you're supposed to play along, and read along, and when you hear the beep, that means you turn the page. So I remember that as a child, and I think that's as far as I got into J.R.R. Tolkien's work. I'm not the right reader for this kind of book, I don't think. Fantasy, Middle Earth. Sounds fascinating, but it just doesn't sound like something up my alley. But a great choice, I think. Next up, we have The Brothers Karamazov. Karamazov. The Brothers Karamazov. You'll let me know in the comment section. Bracia Karamazovi in the original Russian by Dostoevsky. This was Dostoevsky's last book, the last book he would write. I have not read it. I've only read from Dostoevsky. I've read Crime and Punishment, which I loved, and The Gambler, which didn't do much for me. Several love triangles going on, and there's a courtroom drama and a murder mystery. Another good choice by Keanu Reeves, so we know he's into the classics. Apparently, these are 2 classics back to back. I'm more interested to see if there are some contemporary books he will recommend. Spoiler, yes, there are. But yeah, not a bad choice. Next up, we have The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Yeah, this is a masterpiece. I feel almost like it's a book that doesn't really need to be on this list, doesn't need to be recommended. Everybody knows that it's a masterpiece. If you read fiction, you should read The Count of Monte Cristo. It's kind of a standard staple. I say it doesn't need to be on this list, but not that long ago I made a video about the 4 must-reads in fiction, and I included The Count of Monte Cristo. So apparently I'm not above recommending it either. So we have 3 classics right off the bat, and we have British, Russian, and French. So a good mix. This doesn't really tell me much about Keanu Reeves, though. Next up, we have Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. Okay, so this is a 21st century book. One that it will probably be looked back on as a classic. It's received lots of praise from readers. An epic tale that spans hundreds of years, I want to say. I haven't read the book. Apparently it includes a lot of philosophy and puzzles. It's kind of a thinking person's book. So Keanu Reeves is a thinker, which makes sense. And yeah, I think that if Celebrity putting together a list of book recommendations, I think including sci-fi classics and contemporary classics, I think that's a great, I think it's a great choice. Because sci-fi readers, and then that's some of the most passionate and loyal fan base that you can have. Next up, we have The Overstory by Richard Powers. And this book won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction in 2019. So I like that we have a more contemporary work here. And this is another epic sweeping tale that spans over 100 years. And this is about humans' interaction with trees. If I were to reduce it down to one sentence. And it is referred to as activism fiction or environmental activism fiction. So again, we have a book that is has a great reputation. It's also reputed to be quite challenging to the reader. So it's a thinking person's book. So clearly this kind of reading material that Keanu Reeves is drawn to. And it also tells us that he cares about the environment, which is a great thing for celebrities to tell us, I think. So great choice by Keanu Reeves. Okay, moving on, we have The Idiot. So the second book from Dostoevsky. I have heard that it is kind of almost the opposite of Crime and Punishment. Whereas Crime and Punishment is about a man who is racked with guilt, The Idiot is apparently about a man who is racked with innocence. After spending some time in a sanitarium, this man, he returns to St. Petersburg and he finds society is obsessed with money and power and manipulation. And then a scandal erupts because the presence of this innocent person, it has people acting or reacting quite differently to it. This doesn't really give me any more insight into Keanu Reeves because we already had an example of Dostoevsky. Except now we know he really likes Dostoevsky. And I hear great things about The Idiot. Should I read The Idiot? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you. Next up, we have In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. And this is a massive book. It comes in 7 volumes. Well over 4,000 words. I had to read some of this book for a literature class, I think when I was a teenager, like a long time ago. I was way too young to get into that, and I just found it excruciatingly boring and pretentious, but I was too young for it, so I don't know. A lot of people love this book. It is quite intimidating. It's just on the size of it. I am happy that we have a second French writer on this list, so that's nice. Although Marcel Proust, it's hard for me to get excited about that. I'm still, decades later, still suffering the traumatic effects of having to read that for a literature class in high school. Moving on. Next up, we have Notes from Underground. Again, Dostoevsky, the third book from this Russian author. This is the first book from the list that is a reasonable size. I believe this is more of a novella. It's about 140 pages or so. So, okay, that's nice. That's a nice change of pace. And Notes from Underground, I've not read this. Apparently this is some kind of civil servant and he just decides to escape society and he goes underground to write his thoughts, kind of like a manifesto almost. And this guy is crazy. The narrator is an obsessive, self-conscious egomaniac. So you can appreciate for Keanu Reeves, you know, he works in Hollywood on movies, so to read something like this, it gives him a different perspective than the people he's usually around. Moving on, the next book is The Niagara River by Kay Ryan. Okay, so we have our first work of poetry here. In celebrity book recommendations, there is always at least one work of poetry. Kay Ryan is one of the more popular poets, at least coming out of the U.S. She was the poet laureate for the for the Library of Congress not that long ago. I want to say 10 years ago, 2008 to 2010. She is one of the more popular poets. In fact, she's probably just one of a handful of poets I could actually name off the top of my head. Although I have not read much from her. But she has been on my TBR for ages. So thank you, Keanu Reeves, for reminding me that I need to get around to reading a complete collection by Kay Ryan. Moving on, we have, we have Molecular Gastronomy by Hervé Tisse. So, another French writer, the third French writer on the list. Fantastic. And this is the first example of nonfiction. All the other books have been fiction. And here we have some nonfiction. This is a book about the neurology or the science of taste and of cooking. So in this book, Hervé Tisse, he tries to debunk some traditional concepts or myths about cooking, and then he goes into explaining how different ingredients affect the taste, something like that. A book about the science of enjoying food, preparing and enjoying food. I have not read this. I do not read nonfiction. I have a strong aversion to reality, so I avoid nonfiction any chance I can get. But I do know who Hervé Tisse is. He's quite famous in France, my home country. Okay, good. So we know from Keanu Reeves that he is not he's not afraid to delve into the nonfiction occasionally. I am very happy that nonfiction thus far only represents a tiny portion of his recommendations. So I'm happy for that. And it's another French author. Moving on, we have Cosmopolis by Don DeLillo. This is a strange choice, I think, for Keanu Reeves. This is a book, I think it came out in 2003, I want to say, 2006, somewhere thereabouts. And it is a book that at the time felt very dated, and looking back on it now, in my opinion, I did not get on with this book at all. So the book is a condemnation, or a look back on condemnation of this indulgent, greed, money is everything attitude that permeated the 1980s. So it's a look back on that, and it feels like the kind of book that was written, it feels like one of those books that was written in the early 1990s. I would group it along with, like, American Psycho has a similar vibe to it. I think American Psycho is much better. But both American Psycho and Cosmopolis, I think, they both feel very dated. So this is not a book that I particularly enjoyed. And I think it's low-hanging fruit also to, like, say that you're above what the 80s were about as far as the greed and the money is everything kind of attitude. I mean, we're well past that at this point. So a strange choice from Keanu Reeves. If I were his publicist, which I'm not, I might suggest that he find a different way to tell us that, yes, he is wealthy, but he's not one of the evil wealthy people. And by all reports that I've heard, that's the kind of guy he is. He's very generous, philanthropic, down to earth. And if he wants to convey that, I think there are probably better books that condemn the excesses of wealth and the excesses of consumerism. They condemn it better than Cosmopolis. But, oh well. Moving on. We have Say Uncle, again by Kay Ryan. Another one of her collections. I would think that when I finally get around to reading one of her collections, I think it will probably be this one. This is the one that I've heard most about, although I think it's one of her earlier ones. So maybe I'll read Say Uncle, or I'll read whatever she's put out most recently. So he's doubling down on the poetry, and he's doubling down on the Kay Ryan poetry. And I think if you're going to include a poet on your celebrity book recommendations, which I think you kind of have to, I think Kay Ryan is a great choice. I mean, she's one of the more recognizable names, I think, at least in the US. And moving on, we have The Elementary Particles by Michel Houellebecq. So again, a French writer. What is it, the fourth French writer? We've had Hervé Tisse, Alexandre Dumas, Marcel Proust. Yeah, so the fourth French writer. Nice. The Elementary Particles. It's not a book that I have read, although I have talked with people who have read it. So the plot centers around two brothers, stepbrothers, I believe. One is a hedonist, and the other is a emotionally dull molecular biologist. And these two brothers, they both get a chance at love. What will they do with it? From what I've heard of this book, it's a book that is just packed with philosophy, and it comes across as one of those books that is like an essay disguised as a novel. These kinds of books, they do well with juries of book prizes and such. They almost never do well with me. I hate these kinds of books. I do not, if I want to read an essay, which sometimes I do, I will read an essay. And when I read a novel, I really want a novel experience, which for me is something very different. So from what I've heard of this novel, this is not one that is likely to work on me. But again, it's a thinking person's book. So, Keanu Reeves is letting us know that he is a thinking person. And by all accounts, I think he probably is. It's probably genuine. And it's his fourth French author, so well played. Well played, Keanu Reeves. Moving on, we have Kinski Uncut. This is the memoir by German actor Klaus Kinski. I'm vaguely familiar with who Klaus Kinski is. I think I watched a documentary on this horror movie called Crawl Space that he was in. And apparently he's a psychopath on set. And so this memoir is about, he also played Renfield in the Count Dracula, that movie. I'm not really that familiar with his filmography. But this book has a reputation of being, reviewers qualified as pornographic and depraved. Not necessarily in a bad way. Apparently there's a lot of sex. He had a lot of sex and a lot of weird sex. A lot of what a lot of people would consider unhealthy sex. And so, that's his memoir. So this is the second nonfiction book. I think a memoir, one book of poetry at least, and at least one memoir, I think that's kind of par for the course for these celebrity book recommendations. Moving on, we have A Sport and a Pastime by James Salter. So this book came out in the 1960s. I want to say 1967. And this is an American writer who was living in France. And this is a story about an American? Yes, an American student. He drops out of Yale, he goes to France, and he falls in love, or he has a relationship with a French girl. So I have not read James Salter before. I have not read this book, but it feels like this is a subgenre of American writers who live in France, live in Paris most of the time. They live in France and they write their stories. It's almost a subgenre. These books, they never work on me. And maybe that's just a coincidence. I haven't read that many, but the few I have read are just dreadful. The Sun Also Rises, 1 star, terrible book. Another Country, James Baldwin, 1 star, terrible book. So in my opinion, obviously. There must be something about this phenomena, these American writers who move off to France, and I don't like what they produce. And obviously, I've lived in France for a long time, and I've met many Americans in France, and I get on with them great. It's nothing. I'm not anti-American or anti-Americans in France. Those books just don't work on me. But maybe this one is different. I don't know. I could only name you 2 examples of books in that subgenre that I didn't like. So that's too small a sample size to extrapolate a theory like that. But I throw the theory out there. Let me know. Do you have an opinion on this subgenre? Is it a subgenre? I think it happens a lot in literature, especially in the 50s and the 60s. So even before then. Yeah, 30s, 20s, 30s. Yeah, probably still today as well. Anyway, what is your opinion on this subgenre? I'd be curious to find out. Next up, we have... Okay, this is strange. We have Remembrance of Things Past by Marcel Proust. So, Remembrance of Things... This is the same book that we talked about earlier, In Search of Lost Time. The first translation of this book, À la recherche du temps perdu, in the original French. The first English translation was called Remembrance of Things Past. But then later on, I don't want to say the 90s, there was another translation made, celebrated translation, and they changed the title to In Search of Lost Time. But this is the same book, the same collection of books. It's 7 volumes. I'm not going to put that on Keanu Reeves. I don't think he would make that mistake. I think the person who does the website, or I don't know, we'll call that a typo, and we'll move on. We'll move on to the last book selected, another French writer, The Butcher by Alina Reyes. And this is a book of erotica. It's short. It's more of a novella. I have read Alina Reyes before. I have not read The Butcher though. But yeah, it's straight up steamy romance, erotica. The Butcher is about a young woman. She's a virgin, and she fantasizes about her butcher. That's all I know of it. I would be interested in reading more from Alina Reyes. I will be honest with you though that, I do enjoy erotica, but this trope of the protagonist being a virgin, that is not my favorite subgenre of erotica. And it's funny because I will often work as a ghostwriter, writing steamy romance, and so the client will tell me, what to write, what tropes to hit, and then I'll check off boxes. And I hate when the protagonist is a virgin. It's not as much fun to write. And I also, as a reader, I don't enjoy that as well. Nothing against virgins. It's just, I don't know. As a reader and as a writer, not my favorite. So, yeah, that's probably why I never read The Butcher, but I read other books, other stories from her. And it's, what you would expect, straight up erotica. It's quite good, though. And a French writer. So, looking back over his list, we have 5 French writers, right? Alina Reyes, Michel Houellebecq, Henri Matisse, Marcel Proust, and Alexandre Dumas. Yeah, 5 French writers out of 16 books. Nice. We have 3 books from Dostoevsky. Keanu Reeves is Canadian. No Canadian writers. I don't like that. I like the fact that of the 16 books, only 2 nonfiction. So that's great. Thank you, Mr. Reeves, for that. All in all, I think he did a good job. I think he did a good job. He showed us that he's a thinking man. He gave us a lot of classics we can identify with, and also he threw in a few celebrated contemporary books as well. A few works of erotica with the Kinski Uncut and the Alina Reyes book. So he's comfortable with his sexuality, or he's interested in sexuality, which makes someone more compelling and more relatable. He threw in some sci-fi or fantasy classics. Not so much sci-fi, but Cloud Atlas and The Lord of the Rings. These have very passionate fan bases, so it's good to acknowledge them. I think the only miss, I would say, if I were his publicist, I would say the 3 Dostoevskys is a bit redundant, just pick one. And that would give you room to include some Canadian authors. I think there's so many great Canadian authors, and I think as a Canadian, I think you need to acknowledge that. And other than that, and the Cosmopolis, I think that was a miss. It was a miss for me as a reader, but you know, condemning the rich for being rich. I'm all down with that, and I think that's a good message for a wealthy actor to convey to his or her fans. But I think there could be a better example of that, and perhaps a more recent example. So there you have it. I think from his recommendations, what I take away as a reader is, yes, I need to read Kay Ryan. So that's the biggest one. So thank you for the reminder for that, Keanu Reeves. And it's been decades since I read Alina Reyes. So maybe I could check her out again. Maybe I'll check out The Butcher. Do you have any experience with the books or the authors that Keanu Reeves recommends? What is your opinion of this list? I always enjoy connecting with you in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Thank you for picking up a copy of Edifice Complex or my other books. I truly appreciate the support. And thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next video.